Nice Micro Monday, and intellectual property rights are kind of okay, I guess. And today's topic have been requested by my friend Moxfelix on my latest live streams. And if you want to request topics, you can join my live stream, or you can leave me a message or just tag me on Mastodon. That's the best thing I can think of how to connect me with this kind of topic suggestions. Or you can leave a comment somewhere in my video down there. Probably down there is the best place to leave a comment here. But the topic of intellectual property comes up a lot in the kind of GNU/Linux space, in the free software, in the open source software space, because one of the foundational documents of this group of the free software movement is a document related to copyright, which is intellectual property, and that is the GNU public license, the general public license, GNU general public license, the GPL. And because of the GPL's stance that it basically lets people to modify and redistribute source code, specifically, this is why a lot of people in this space think of, I think, kind of also tend to view intellectual property in that kind of way that it's antithetical to the GPL, because in a lot of the intellectual property rights basically stops you from copying stuff. And I wanted to just share my thoughts about it. So one of the things that people usually say when it comes to comparing intellectual property to just like physical property is that how big the difference is between these two. Like they try to treat like physical property as kind of a more intrinsic and a physical thing, while intellectual property is just a meme that's only in our heads. And that makes kind of sense on the surface level, because I don't know, if I have this phone with me and someone comes and grabs this phone and takes it away from me, then now I'm left without a phone. And you can argue it's a good or a bad thing that I'm left without a phone, but if I just have a good idea, I write a story, I have like a good story, and someone reads that story and then retells that story, I still have that story, so it's not being taken away from me the same way as something that I can hold in my hands, like a physical object. But of course, in general, ownership of physical property is not intrinsic to the universe. Like if I give my phone, like some of my friends want to borrow my phone, I give them for 2 days for some unexplainable reason. I borrow them the phone, and then they of course give it back to me. But the time that the phone is at my friend, that's like there is no physical difference. The difference is in my head. Like the difference is that I personally consented for them to take away my phone and leave me without a phone, and then my expectation in my head that they will give it back to me. But if I just give it away for free to someone, maybe I don't need it anymore. What's the difference? The consent is the difference, of course. And the consent is kind of it's not really intrinsic to the physical universe in that kind of way. It's more like a concept that our society values a lot. So consent is something that free societies, of course, value kind of the paramount, as their paramount like basis of their the system of we live in. And there is just like, if you think about like where I am, I'm in an apartment, and well, I do not own this apartment. I rent this apartment, so I pay for it on a monthly basis to live here. But the thing is that I live in this place, so I sit at this table. I own this table. This is the table I own. Anyways, but I do not own the house, or I do not own this apartment. I do not own the rooms, but I spend my time here when I'm home. This is my home, basically. And well, if I bought this, I would do the same thing. The difference that would be is that I would have a paper somewhere in a government office that would have my name on it. And well, how is that not just a meme? So that's also something that basically a government is providing us, that we can own this kind of intangible, like this apartment. Or even if you think about a car, like your car is lots of times quite far away, so you don't keep an eye on it all the time. The thing that makes it your car is the document that says that it is your car, and that document makes only sense because the government accepts that document and provides you with the right to own the car. So of course we could imagine a society where you are not allowed to personally own a car. You have to rent it from the government or something. So I don't really buy this kind of distinction that property, like physical property, is kind of a more intrinsic thing, while intellectual property is just something, this spooky thing that's made up. I think both are made up. That's what I'm trying to say here. And why we made these things up is because they have some kind of usefulness in like our human perspective. So their usefulness is of course also subjective to the human experience, but we figured out that, you know, to buy a phone like this, it's kind of makes a lot of energy and physical labor and the resources to make a phone like this. So if you want this kind of phone, you of course cannot make it by yourself, but you can use your skills, go to work, go to your job, do your job, get paid for the job, and then pay someone to make this phone for you, and then you get a phone. We want this kind of thing to happen when someone wants a phone. They do something that's useful, they do something that's they're good at, and then they get paid for, and they buy a phone, and then they can keep it instead of trying to steal it from each other. We prefer this society where people work for these things instead of the society where people are running around stealing stuff from each other. And I think this is the lens we should view intellectual property through. So, because people say that, like, in this sense, how like physical objects are scarce, so if you take it away from me, I don't have it anymore. Ideas are not scarce, but also good ideas are quite rare, if we cannot use that word scarce, but they are still rare. So many people could come up with stories, and probably most of them would be quite bad. So there is kind of a reason why most of the people like to read the same books or like to watch the same type of movies, or the same movies in general, because there are like a small percentage of good things and there are like a very large percentage of like these bad ideas that no one really cares about. So we would like to live in a society which encourages us to produce good ideas and lets people to profit from having good ideas by basically the government protecting you and giving you the sole right to manage who can copy and how can your work be copied. And in general, I don't really have a big issue with that. I have an issue with how it's implemented, so I really don't think that you should have like really a lot of decades to be able to profit off like one idea, especially when it comes to like entertainment, like stories or, you know, movies, things like that. I think that's a silly thing to have like, I don't know, like 70 or 60 years protection, but that's really like a technical argument, I guess. For other intellectual property types like patents, I quite like the idea of patents because first of all, a patent is transparent, so you can see what's in the patent, and in the patents usually in general should, in my opinion, cover things that, you know, where it is not really easy to implement the things. So you have to have a lot of good ideas to make the thing work, and in the meantime, to come up with the good ideas, you had to go through and weed out a lot of bad ideas in case of invention. So that's why I'm absolutely against being able to patent concepts like copying files from a digital camera to a computer. That's utterly nonsense. That's a very trivial idea, and the patent offices that allow these kind of patents to exist should be ashamed of themselves, I guess, because this is not what it serves the society that these things should be serving. And I think actually having this kind of patents, like my experience is in the pharma industry. I worked in the pharma industry for, well, three years, but in general there you have to have a lot of good ideas to have like a drug that probably can even save lives. And Well, it makes sense that for all the effort you have to put in and you have to go through a lot of the bad things to find the good ones, and then you have to prove the good ones really don't kill the patient and then they really work, and that all those things take a lot of money. And if someone could just take away the idea and build their own factories to use the same ideas to produce the same drug, but the other guy already did all the expensive research to come up with the idea, then that would not really encourage people to come up with new ideas, and we can all see why that would be a problem. And so I don't really think that there is like a big issue in the philosophical concept of intellectual property when it comes to their ethical implications. But while I am a big proponent of the GPL licensing in case of software, and then specifically in software, because software is a very specific case. So software is very different than other things that are protected under copyright law, like drawing or a story, because software runs on a relatively universal machine. And we kind of expect that people have these universal machines called computers in their homes, containing a lot of their personal data, a lot of things that are their private information, a lot of things that are their personal stuff on that computer. So the expectation that when you run something on that computer, then you can hypothetically audit what your computer is doing, and the computer is doing what you want and doesn't do something that someone else wants, is a very important ethical consideration. So running free software on your computer is I think that's a very, very different issue than just having a copyrighted story, because in case of a story, so let's not forget that you can read the story, so you can read it from and understand the story from top to bottom. You just don't have the right to copy it. Of course, like modifying a story, that would make sense, but we don't let you to modify the story and sell it to someone else. That's a kind of how copyright works. But in case of the free software, the creators of the license, the GPL license, thought that it's a good idea from a practical consideration, not just let the person who wants to run the code to be able to study the code and modify it to their own purpose. So you buy a book, you don't like the ending, you can tear out the last page and write your own ending for it. That's okay, and that is, I think, like the most important parts of the GPL. And the other part of the GPL that lets you to distribute the code again and distribute the modified version, that is kind of a practical consideration, I think, from the GPL part, in which I think Stallman believes in this, that that would end up having better software in the end if people would modify it and then could without any restriction. So there should be no restriction enforced on them to use that modified version and then give that back to society. So that we can see that that's kind of a two-edged sword in a way, that how like proprietary software companies make a lot more money. So the financial incentives for the proprietary software companies is much higher than for the free software companies, and that we can argue whether those proprietary companies should be able to have that money or not. That's a totally different thing. But I don't think that in general, like, intellectual property is a bad idea. I think in case of, and I agree that in case of software we have to have different standards, just because software is instructions for your computer to do something, and that's qualitatively different than other kind of intellectual things. So, for example, this is like the Stallman's example for the recipe of the Coca-Cola, that he doesn't really have to know how Coca-Cola is made, because it's made on the equipment of the Coca-Cola company. The only thing he has to know is that whether this will kill him or not. And so I guess you could like have a secret method of making something, but like as an industrial secret, and that's fine. But if you want something to be done on someone else's computer, like you are writing a software that will be run on someone's personal computer, that's ethically a totally different question. And so in this respect, I don't really think that the ethical questions concerning the GPL license are really related to the philosophical underpinnings of the intellectual property system we have. It's more just based on the ethical ethics of running software on someone's computer. So, Nice Micro Monday and intellectual property rights are kinda okay, I guess.